unsigned long total forks, handle normal Linux uptimes. Int near threads, the idle threads do not count. Int max threads, tunable limit on near threads. Define per CPU unsigned long, process counts, 0. Cache aligned define with lock task list lock, outer. Hash if def config prove RCU. Int lock def task list lock is held void. Return lock dep is held and task list lock. Export symbol GPL lock dep task list lock is held. Hash end if def config prove RCU. Int near process is void. Int CPU. Int total 0. For each possible CPU, total plus equals per CPU process counts, CPU. Return total. Void weak arch release task struct task struct tsk. Hash if def config arch task struct allocator. Static struct kmem cache task struct cachep. Static inline struct task struct alloc task struct node int node. Return kmem cache alloc node task struct cachep, gfp kernel, node. Static inline void free task struct tsk. Kmem cache free task struct cachep, tsk. Hash endif. Void weak arch release thread info struct thread info t. Hash if def config arch thread info allocator. / allocate pages if thread size is equals page size, otherwise user. Kmemcache based allocator. Hash if thread size equals page size. Static struct thread info alloc thread info node struct task struct tsk. Int node. Struct page alloc pages node. Threadifo gfp accounted. Thread size order. Return page. Page address page, null. Static inline void free thread info struct thread info t. Free memp g kmem pages unsigned long t, thread size order. Hash else. Static struct kmem cache thread info cache. Static struct thread info alloc thread info node struct task struct tsk. Int node. Return kmem cache alloc node thread info cache, threadifo gfp, node. Static void free thread info struct thread info t. Kmem cache free thread info cache, t. Void thread info cache int void. Thread info cache kmem cache create, thread info, thread size. Thread size, 0, null. Bug on thread info cache equals null. Hash endif. Hash endif. / cache for signal struct structures tsk signal. Static struct kmem cache signal cachep. / cache for syad struct structures tsk syad. Struct kmem cache syad cachep. / cache for files struct structures tsk files. Struct kmem cache files cachep. / cache for fs struct structures tsk fs. Struct kmem cache fs cachep. / cache for vm area struct structures. Struct kmem cache vm area cachep. / cache for millimeters struct structures tsk millimeters. Static struct kmem cache millimeters cachep. Static void account kernel stack struct thread info t, int account. Struct zone page zone vert to page t. Mod zone page state zone, near kernel stack, account. Void free task struct tsk. Account kernel stack tsk stack, -1. Arch released thread info tsk stack. Free thread info tsk stack. RT mutex debug task free TSK. For trace graph exit task TSK. Put secomp filter TSK. Arch release task struct TSK. Free task struct TSK. Export symbol free task. Static inline void free signal struct signal. Task stat skid free signal. SCHED autogroup exit signal. Kmem cache free signal cachep signal. Static inline void put signal struct signal. If atomic December and test and signal sigt free signal struct signal. Void put task struct TSK. Warn on TSK exit state. Warn on atomic read and TSK usage. Warn on TSK equals current. Security task free TSK. Exit creds TSK. Delay account TSK free TSK. Put signal struct TSK signal. If profile add off task TSK free task TSK. Export symbol GPL put task struct. Voidite weak arch task cacheite void. Voidite forkite unsigned long mem pages. Hashifdef config arch task struct allocator. Hashifdef arch minimum task alig. Hash define arch minimum task alig 1 pound cache bytes. Hash endif. Create a slab on which task structs can be allocated. Task struct cachep mem cache create. Task struct size of struct task struct. Arch minimum task alig. Slab panic slab attrack null. Hash endif. / do the arch specific task cacheite. Arch task cacheite. / The default maximum number of threads is set to a safe value. The thread structures can take up at most half of memory. Max threads mem pages 8 thread size page size. / We need to allow at least 20 threads to boot a system. If max threads 20, max threads 20. I task signalim alimit procolim ker max threads / 2. I task signalim alimit procolim max threads / 2. I task signalim alimit sigpedic. I task signalim alimit proc. Int attribute weak. Archdup task struct dst. Struct task struct src. dst src. Return 0. Static struct task struct dup task struct orig. Struct task struct tsk. Struct thread info t. Unsigned long stacked. Int node tsk fork get node orig. Inter tsk alloc task struct node. If tsk return null. T-alloc thread info node tsk node. If t go to free tsk. Archdup task struct tsk orig. If go to free t. Tsk stack t. Set up thread stack tsk orig. Clear user return notifier tsk. Clear tsk need reached tsk. Stacked end of stack tsk. Stacked stack end magic, for overflow detection. Hashifdef config cc stack protector. Tsk stack canary get random int. Hash endif. / 1 for us, 1 for whoever does the release task, usually parent. Atomic set and tsk usage, 2. Hashifdef config blk devio trace. Tsk btrace secu 0. Hash endif. TSK splice pipe null. TSK task frag page null. Account kernel stack T1. Return TSK. Free T. Free thread info T. Free TSK. Free task struct TSK. Return null. Hash if def config MMU. Static int dup map struct millimeters struct millimeters struct oldum. Struct VM area struct MPNT, TMP, previous, prev. Struct RB node RB link, RB parent. Int retval. Unsigned long charge. Uprobe start dup map. Down right and oldum map sem. Flush cached up millimeters oldum. Uprobe dup map oldum, millimeters. Not linked in yet, no deadlock potential. Down right nested and millimeters map sem, single depth nesting. Millimeters locked VM 0. Millimeters map null. Millimeters map cache null. Millimeters map count 0. Kpu mask clear millimeters kpu mask millimeters. Millimeters to millimeters RB root. RB link and millimeters to millimeters RB node. RB parent null. Prev and millimeters map. Retval KSM fork millimeters, oldum. If retval, go to out. Retval cut paged fork millimeters, oldum. If retval, go to out. Previous null. For MPNT oldum map, MPNT VM next. Struct file. If MPNT VM flags and VM.copy. VM stat account millimeters, MPNT VM flags, MPNT VM file. VMA pages MPNT. Continue. Charge 0. If MPNT VM flags and VM account. Unsigned long len VMA pages MPNT. If security VM enough memory millimeters oldum, len, sick. Go to failomem. Charge len. TMP knem cache alloc VM area cachep, GFP kernel. If TMP, go to failomem. TMP MPNT. Ite list head and TMP anon VMA chain. Retval VMA dup policy MPNT, TMP. If retval, go to failomem policy. TMP VM millimeters. If anon VMA fork TMP, MPNT, go to failomem anon VMA fork. TMP VM flags and equals VM locked. TMP VM next TMP VM previous null. File TMP VM file. If file. Struct inode file. Struct address space mapping file F mapping. Get file. If TMP VM flags and VM daywrite, atomic December and inode iWrite ku. Mutex lock and mapping IMAP mutex. If TMP VM flags and VM shed, mapping IMAP writable ++. Flush DCRG map lock mapping. Insert TMP into the shell list, just after MPNT. If unlikely TMP VM flags and VM nonlinear, VMA nonlinear insert TMP. And mapping IMAP nonlinear. Else. VMA interval tree insert after TMP, MPNT. And mapping IMAP. Flush DCRG map unlock mapping. Mutex unlock and mapping IMAP mutex. / Clear Hugetile B related page reserves for children. This only affects map private mappings. Faults generated by the child are not guaranteed to succeed, even if read-only. If is VM huge tilb page TMP, reset VMA reset huge pages TMP. / link in the new VMA and copy the page table entries. Prev TMP. Prev and TMP VM next. TMP VM previous TMP. VMA link RB millimeters, TMP, RB link, RB parent. RB link and TMP VM RB right. RB parent and TMP VM RB. Millimeters map count ++. Retvil copy page range millimeters, oldum, MPNT. If TMP VM ops and TMP VM ops open, TMP VM ops open TMP. If retvil, go to out. A new millimeters has just been created. Arcdup map oldum, millimeters. Retvil 0. Out. Upright and millimeters map sem. Flush TLB millimeters oldum. Upright and oldum map sem. Uprobe and duck map. Return retvil. Failomum non VMA fork. Mpol put VMA policy TMP. Failomum policy. Kmem cache free VM area cache TMP. Failomum. Retvil eomum. VMU count memory charge. Go to out. Static inline int millimeters alloc PGD struct millimeters millimeters PGD alloc millimeters. If unlikely, millimeters PGD return eomum. Return 0. Static inline void millimeters free PGD struct millimeters PGD free millimeters PGD. Hash else. Hash define duck map millimeters, oldum, 0. Hash define millimeters alloc PGD millimeters, 0. Hash define millimeters free PGD millimeters. Hash endif config MMU. Cache aligned in SMP define spylark list lock. Hash define allocate millimeters. Kmem cache alloc millimeters cachep. GFP kernel. Hash define free millimeters. Kmem cache free millimeters cachep millimeters. Static unsigned long default dump filter MMF dump filter default. Static intite core dump filter setup char s. Default dump filter simple stri 2s, null, 0, MMF dump filter shift, and MMF dump filter mask. Return 1. Setup, core dump filter setup. Hash include Linux /ike task h. Static void millimeters IO struct millimeters. Hash if def config AIO. Spin lock it and millimeters I octet lock. Millimeters I octet table null. Hash endif. Static struct millimeters I struct millimeters. Struct task struct p. Atomic set and millimeters to millimeters users, 1. Atomic set and millimeters to millimeters count, 1. It rules m and millimeters map sem. It list head and millimeters list. Millimeters flags current millimeters. Current millimeters flags and MMF it mask, default dump filter. Millimeters core state null. Atomic long set and millimeters near pints, 0. Mem set and millimeters RSS stat, 0. Size of millimeters RSS stat. Spin lock it and millimeters page table lock. Millimeters it AIO millimeters. Millimeters it owner millimeters, p. Clear TLB flush pending millimeters. If likely. Millimeters alloc PGD millimeters. Millimeters definite flags 0. Mu notifier millimeters it millimeters. return millimeters. Free millimeters, return null. Static void check millimeters struct millimeters. In type. For I0, I near millimeter counters, I++. Long X atomic long read and millimeters RSS stat count I. If unlikely X, crit kernel alert bug, bad RSS counter state. Millimeters, %PEDEX, %DVAL, %Lord \n, millimeters, I, X. Hash if defined config transparent huge page, and use split PMD locks. VM bug on millimeters PMD huge PTE. Hash endif. / allocate and initialize in millimeters struct. Struct millimeters alloc void. Struct millimeters millimeters allocate millimeters. If millimeters, return null. Memset millimeters, 0, size of millimeters. Millimeters itq mask millimeters. Return millimeters it millimeters, current. / called when the last reference to the millimeters is dropped, either by a lazy thread or by gut. Free the page directory and the millimeters. Void drop struct millimeters. Bug on millimeters equals and it millimeters. Millimeters free pgd millimeters. Destroy context millimeters. Mu notifier millimeters destroy millimeters. Check millimeters. Free millimeters. Export symbol GPL drop. / decrement the use count and release all resources for in millimeters. Void struct millimeters. Might sleep. If atomic December and test and millimeters to millimeters users. Uprobe clear state millimeters. Exit AIO millimeters. KSM exit millimeters. Cut paged exit millimeters, must run before exit map. Exit map millimeters. Set millimeters exe file millimeters, null. If list empty and millimeters list. Spin lock and list lock. List del and millimeters list. Spin unlock and list lock. If millimeters befnt, module put millimeters befit module. Drop millimeters. Export symbol GPL cut. Void set millimeters exe file struct millimeters. Struct file new exe file. If new exe file, get file new exe file. If millimeters exe file, put millimeters exe file. Millimeters exe file new exe file. Struct file get millimeters exe file struct millimeters. Struct file exe file. / we need mapsem to protect against races with removal of exe file. Down read and millimeters mapsem. Exe file millimeters exe file. If exe file, get file exe file. Up read and millimeters mapsem. Return exe file. Static void duck millimeters exe file struct millimeters struct oldum, struct millimeters struct u. It's safe to write the exe file pointer without exe file lock because this is called during fork when the task is not yet in / proc. exe file get millimeters exe file oldum. / get task millimeters acquire a reference to the task's millimeters. Returns %null if the task has no millimeters. Checks pf thread meaning. This kernel work thread has transiently adopted a user millimeters with use millimeters. To do its AIO, is not set and if so returns a reference to it, after bumping up the use count. User must release the millimeters via mgut after use. Typically used by /proc and pine trace. Struct millimeters struct get task millimeters struct task struct task. Struct millimeters struct millimeters. Task lock task. Millimeters task millimeters. If millimeters. If task flags and pf thread, millimeters now. Else. Atomic incorporated and millimeters to millimeters users. Task unlock task. Return millimeters. Export symbol GPL get task millimeters. Struct millimeters access struct task unsigned int mode. Struct millimeters inter. Mutex lock killable and task signal cred guard mutex. If a returner ptr. Millimeters get task millimeters task. If millimeters and millimeters equals current millimeters and. Pine trace may access task mode. Mgut millimeters. Millimeters ptr x's. Mutex unlock and task signal cred guard mutex. Return millimeters. Static void complete fork done struct task struct tsk. Struct completion fork. Task lock tsk. Fork tsk fork done. If likely fork. TSK fork done now. Complete fork. Task unlock TSK. Static int wait for fork done struct task struct child. Struct completion fork. Int killed. Freezer do not count. Killed wait for completion killable fork. Freezer count. If killed. Task lock child. Child fork done now. Task unlock child. Put task struct child. Return killed. / please note the differences between mgut and millimeters release. Mgut is called whenever we stop holding onto a millimeters struct. Error success whatever. Millimeters release is called after a millimeters struct has been removed from the current process. This difference is important for error handling, when we only half set up a millimeters struct for a new process and need to restore the old one. Because we mgut the new millimeters struct before restoring the old one. Eric Viadama January 10th, 1998. Void millimeters release struct task struct tsk, struct millimeters. Get rid of any futexes when releasing the millimeters. #if def config futex. If unlikely tsk robust list. Exit robust list tsk. Tsk robust list now. #if def config comput. If unlikely tsk comput robust list. Comput exit robust list tsk. Tsk comput robust list now. #endif. If unlikely. List empty and tsk pi state list. Exit pi state list tsk. #endif. Uprobe free u task tsk. / get rid of any cached register state. Deactivate millimeters tsk, millimeters. / If we're exiting normally, clear a user space TID field if requested. We leave this alone when dying by signal, to leave the value intact in a core dump, and to save the unnecessary trouble. Say, a killed fork parent shouldn't touch this millimeters. User lad only wants this done for a system exit. If tsk clear child TID. If tsk flags and pf sigaled, and atomic read and millimeters to millimeters users. 1. We don't check the error code if user space has Not set up a proper pointer, then tough luck. Put user 0, tsk clear child TID. System futex tsk clear child TID, futex wake. 1, null, 0. tsk clear child TID null. /. All done. Finally we can wake up parent and return this millimeters to him. Also thread stop uses this completion for synchronization. If tsk fork done, complete fork done tsk. /. Allocate a new millimeters structure and copy contents from the millimeters structure of the past in task structure. Static struct millimeters struct dup millimeters struct task struct tsk. Struct millimeters, oldum current millimeters. Inter millimeters allocate millimeters. If millimeters, go to failomem. Mempi millimeters, oldum, size of millimeters. Millimeters itqpu mask millimeters. Hash if defined config transparent huge page, and use split pmd ptlocks. Millimeters pmd huge pte null. Hash endif. If millimeters it millimeters, tsk, go to failomem. If it new context tsk, millimeters, go to failocotext. Dup millimeters exe file oldum, millimeters. Dup map millimeters, oldum. If go to 3 pint. Millimeters high water RSS get millimeters RSS millimeters. Millimeters high water VM millimeters total VM. If millimeters befnt and try module get millimeters befnt module, go to 3 pint. Return millimeters. 3 pint. Don't put befnt in gut, we haven't got module yet. Millimeters befnt null. Gut millimeters. Failomem. Return null. Failocotext. If it new context failed, we cannot use mgut to free the millimeters, because it calls destroy context. Millimeters free pgd millimeters. Free millimeters. Return null. Static int copy millimeters unsigned long clone flags. Struct task struct tsk. Struct millimeters, oldum. Int retval. tsk minimum flt tsk major flt 0. tsk nvcsw tsk ifxwa 0. Hash if def config detect hung task. tsk last switch count tsk nvcsw plus tsk ifxwa. Hash endif. tsk millimeters null. tsk active millimeters null. /. Are we cloning a kernel thread? We need to steal a active VM for that. Oldum current millimeters. If oldum, return 0. If clone flags and clone VM. Atomic incorporated and oldum millimeters users. Millimeters oldum. Go to good millimeters. Retval eomem. Millimeters dup millimeters tsk. If millimeters, go to failomem. Good millimeters. tsk millimeters. tsk active millimeters. Return 0. Failomem. Return retval. Static int copy fs unsigned long clone flags. Struct task struct tsk. Struct fs current fs. If clone flags and clone fs. tsk fs is already what we want. Spin lock and fs lock. If fs in exec. Spin unlock and fs lock. Return eguy. fs users ++. spin unlock and fs lock. Return 0. tskfs copy fs struct fs. If tskfs, return neomem. Return 0. Static int copy files unsigned long clone flags, struct task struct tsk. Struct files struct old, youth. Int error 0. // A background process may not have any files. Old current files. If old go to out. If clone flags and clone files. Atomic incorporated and old count. Go to out. You've up fd old and error. If you've go to out. tsk files you've error 0 out. Return error. Static int copy io unsigned long clone flags, struct task struct tsk. If def config block. Struct io context ioc current io context. Struct io context new ioc. If ioc, return 0. Share io context with parent, if clone io is set. If clone flags and clone io. IOC task link IOC. tsk io context IOC, else if io prio valid IOC io prio. New IOC get task io context tsk, gfp kernel, human no node. If unlikely. New IOC, return neomem. New IOC io prio IOC io prio. Put io context new IOC. #endif. Return 0. Static int copy add unsigned long clone flags, struct task struct tsk. Struct add struct signal. If clone flags and clone add. Atomic incorporated and current add count. Return 0. Signal kmem cache alloc add cachep, gfp kernel. Arcu assign pointer tsk add, signal. If signal, return neomem. Atomic set and signal count, 1. Mempi signal action, current add action, size of signal action. Return 0. Void cleanup add struct add. If atomic December and test and add count. Sigalft cleanup add. Kmem cache free add cachep, add. / Initialize POSIX timer handling for a thread group. Static void POSIX CPU timers ite group struct signal. Unsigned long CPU limit. / thread group counters. Thread group time ite signal. CPU limit access once signal limit CPU ka. If CPU limit equals infinity. Signal time expires. Professor exp seconds to time CPU limit. Signal timer running 1. / the timer lists. Ite list head and signal CPU timers 0. Ite list head and signal CPU timers 1. Ite list head and signal CPU timers 2. Static int copy signal unsigned long clone flags, struct task struct tsk. Struct signal. If clone flags and clone thread, return 0. Signal kmem cache zalyok signal cachep, gfp kernel. tsk signal. If signal, return neomem. Signal near threads 1. Atomic set and signal live, 1. Atomic set and signal sigt, 1. / list at thread node, thread head, without ite list head. Signal thread head struct list head ite tsk thread node. tsk thread node struct list head ite signal thread head. It wait Q head and signal wait cod exit. Signal cut target TSK. It sig pedic and signal shared pending. It list head and signal POSIX timers. Hour timer it and signal real timer. Clock monotonic, hour timer mode REL. Signal real timer function it real FN. Task lock current group leader. Mempi signalalem, current signalalem, size of signalalem. Task unlock current group leader. POSIX CPU timers it group signal. TT audit fork signal. SCHED auto group fork signal. #ifdef config groups. It rules M and signal group rules M. #endif. Signal adjective current signal adjective. Signal adjective minimum current signal adjective minimum. Signal has child subrepa current signal has child subrepa. Current signal is child subrepa. Mutex it and signal cred guard mutex. Return 0. Static void copy flags unsigned long clone flags, struct task struct P. Unsigned long new flags P flags. New flags and equals PF superpriv PF WQ worker. New flags equals PF forker exec. P flags new flags. Syscall define one set TID address, int user, tidptor. Current clear child TID tidptor. Return task PID VNR current. Static void RT mutex it task struct P. Raw spin lock it and PPI lock. #ifdef config RT mutexes. PPI waiters RB root. PPI waiters leftmost null. PPI blocked on null. PPI top task null. #endif. #ifdef config millimeter owner. Void millimeters it owner struct millimeters, struct task struct P. Millimeters owner P. #endif config millimeter owner. /. Initialize POSIX timer handling for a single task. Static void POSIX CPU timers it struct task struct TSK. Tscape PUTime expires. Professor exp0. Tscape PUTime expires vert exp0. Tscape PUTime expires SCHED exp0. It list head and TSK CPU timers 0. It list head and TSK CPU timers 1. It list head and TSK CPU timers 2. Static inline void. It task PID struct task PID type struct PID. Task PID's type PID. /. This creates a new process as a copy of the old one, but does not actually start it yet. It copies the registers, and all the appropriate parts of the process environment as per the clone flags. The actual kickoff is left to the caller. Static struct task struct copy process unsigned long clone flags. Unsigned long stack start. Unsigned long stack size. Int user child tidptor. Struct PID. Int trace. Int retrval. Struct task struct P. If clone flags and clone use clone fs equals clone use clone fs, return a ptr evil. If clone flags and clone u user clone fs equals clone u user clone fs, return a ptr evil. /. Thread groups must share signals as well, and detached threads can only be started up within the thread group. If clone flags and clone thread, and clone flags and clone syad, return a ptr evil. / shared signal handlers imply shared VM. By way of the above, thread groups also imply shared VM. Blocking this case allows for various simplifications in other code. If clone flags and clone syad, and clone flags and clone VM, return a ptr evil. / siblings of globalite remain as zombies on exit since they are not reaped by their parent swapper. To solve this and to avoid multi-rooted process trees, prevent global and containerites from creating siblings. If clone flags and clone parent, and current signal flags and signal ukillable, return a ptr evil. / if the new process will be in a different PID or user namespace, do not allow it to share a thread group or signal handlers or parent with the forking task. If clone flags and clone syad, if clone flags and clone u use a clone upid, task active PID ends current equals current sproxa PID ends for children, return a ptr evil. Retvil security task create clone flags. If Retvil, go to forkout. Retvil eomum. Pdup task struct current. If P, go to forkout. For trace graphite task P, get secomp filter P. RT mutexite task P. If def config prove locking. Debug locks worn on. P hardux enabled. Debug locks worn on. P softux enabled. #endif. Retvil eguy. If atomic read and P real cred user processes equals task limit P limit proc. If P real cred user equals it user and capable cap system resource and capable cap system admin, go to bad fork 3. Current flags and equals pf proc exceeded. Retvil copy creds P, clone flags. If Retvil 0, go to bad fork 3. / if multiple threads are within copy process, then this check triggers too late. This doesn't hurt, the check is only there to stop root fork bombs. Retvil eguy. If near threads equals max threads, go to bad fork cleanup count. If try module get task thread info p exec domain module, go to bad fork cleanup count. Delay count tsk it p must remain after dup task struct. Copy flags clone flags p. It list head and p children. It list head and p sibling. Rq copy process p. P fork done now. Spin lock it and p alloc lock. It sigpedic and p pending. Pu time peace time peak time 0. Pu time scaled peace time scaled 0. If def config vert CPU accounting native. P previous pu time u time p previous pu times time 0. #endif. If def config vert CPU accounting general. C clock it and pf time c clock. Pf time snap 0. Pf time snap whence time sleeping. #endif. If defined split RSS counting, memset and PRSS stat, 0, size of PRSS stat. #endif. P default timer /ends current timer /ends. Task IO accounting it and P ilac. Account clear integrals P. POSIX CPU timers it P. Do POSIX clock monotonic getime and P start time. P real start time P start time. Monotonic to boot based and P real start time. P PIO context null. P audit context null. If clone flags and clone thread group change begin current. Group fork P. Hash if def config UMA. Pmem policy impolled up pmem policy. If is a pmem policy. Retful pt other pmem policy. Pmem policy null. Go to bad fork cleanup group. Impoll fix fork child flag P. Hash endif. Hash if def config proceeds. Peak percent mem spread rota human no node. Peak percent slab spread rota human no node. Secu it and pmems allowed secu. Hash endif. Hash if def config tracing flags. PQ events 0. P hardux enabled 0. P hardq enable IP 0. P hardq enable event 0. P hardq disable IP this IP P hardq disable event 0. P softux enabled 1. P softq enable IP this IP P softq enable event 0. P softq disable IP 0. P softq disable event 0. P hardq context 0. P softq context 0. Hash endif. Hash if def config lockdep. P lockdep depth 0, no locks held yet. P cut chain key 0. P lockdep recursion 0. Hash endif. Hash if def config debug mutexes. P blocked on null, not blocked yet. Hash endif. Hash if def config mempg. P mempg batch.do batch 0. P mempg batch mempg null. Hash endif. Hash if def config cache. P sequential IO 0. P sequential IO average 0. Hash endif. /perform scheduler related setup. Assign this task to a CPU. Retvil sched fork clone flags, P. If Retvil, go to bad fork cleanup policy. Retvil perf event type task P. If Retvil, go to bad fork cleanup policy. Retvil audit alloc P. If Retvil, go to bad fork cleanup policy. Copy all the process information. Retvil copy semudo clone flags, P. If Retvil, go to bad fork cleanup audit. Retvil copy files clone flags, P. If Retvil, go to bad fork cleanup semudo. Retvil copy fs clone flags, P. If Retvil, go to bad fork cleanup files. Retvil copy syad clone flags, P. If Retvil, go to bad fork cleanup fs. Retvil copy signal clone flags, P. If Retvil, go to bad fork cleanup syad. Retvil copy millimeters clone flags, P. If Retvil, go to bad fork cleanup signal. Retvil copy namespaces clone flags, P. If Retvil, go to bad fork cleanup millimeters. Retvil copy IO clone flags, P. If Retvil, go to bad fork cleanup namespaces. Retvil copy thread clone flags, stack start, stack size, P. If Retvil, go to bad fork cleanup IO. If PID equals and int struct PID. Retvil eomem. PID alloc PID psproxa PID ends for children. If PID, go to bad fork cleanup IO. Pset child TID clone flags and clone child setted. Child tid tor null. Clear TID on millimeters release. P clear child TID clone flags and clone child clitted. Child tid tor null. Hash if def config block. P plug null. Hash endif. Hash if def config futex. P robust list null. Hash if def config comput. P P complete robust list null. Hash endif. Ith list head and P pi state list. P pi state cache null. Hash endif. Sigout stack should be cleared when sharing the same VM. If clone flags and clone VM clone fork equals clone VM, psas SSSP psas SS size 0. / syscall tracing and stepping should be turned off in the child regardless of clone pine trace. User disable single step P. Clear TSK thread flag P, TIF syscall trace. Hashif def TIF syscall emu. Clear TSK thread flag P, TIF syscall emu. Hash endif. Clear all latency tracing P. / OK, now we should be set up. PID near PID. If clone flags and clone thread. P exit signal -1. P group leader current group leader. P gid current gid, else. If clone flags and clone parent. P exit signal current group leader exit signal. Else. P exit signal clone flags and xiggle. P group leader P. P gid PPID. P near dirted 0. P near dirted pause 128 page shift 10. P dirty paused when 0. P def signal 0. Ith list head and P thread group. P task works null. / make it visible to the rest of the system, but don't wake it up yet. Need task list lock for parent etc. handling. Write lock EQ and task list lock. / clone parent reuses the old parent. If clone flags and clone parent clone thread. P real parent current real parent. P parent exec ID current parent exec ID, else. P real parent current. P parent exec ID current self exec ID. Spin lock and current syad lock. / process group and session signals need to be delivered to just the parent before the fork or both the parent and the child after the fork. Restart if a signal comes in before we add the new process to its process group. A fatal signal pending means that current will exit, so the new thread can't slip out of an OOM kill or normal sig kill. Recalculate sigpedig. If signal pending current. Spin unlock and current syad siglock. Write unlock EQ and task list lock. Retval error startator. Go to bad fork free PID. If likely PPID. Pine trace I task P, clone flags and clone pine trace. I task PID P, PID type PID. If thread group leader P. I task PID P, PID type PID, task PGRP current. I task PID P, PID type SID, task session current. If is child reaper PID. Ends of PID child reaper P. P signal flags equals signal U killable. P signal leader PID. P signal TTE cref get current signal TTE. List add tail and P sibling, and P real parent children. List add tail ARCU and P tasks, and I tasks. Attach PID P, PID type PID. Attach PID P, PID type SID. This CPU incorporated process counts, else. Current signal near threads ++. Atomic incorporated and current signal live. Atomic incorporated and current signal SIGD. List add tail ARCU and P thread group. And P group leader thread group. List add tail ARCU and P thread node. and P signal thread head. Attach PID P, PID type PID. Near threads plus plus. Total forks plus plus. Spin unlock and current SIAD siglock. Right unlock a queue and task list lock. Proc fork connector P. Group post fork P. If clone flags and clone thread, thread group change end current. Perf event fork P. Trace task U task P, clone flags. Uprobe copy process P, clone flags. Return P. Bad fork free PID. If PID equals and struct PID, free PID. Bad fork cleanup IO. If PIO context, exit IO context P. Bad fork cleanup namespaces. Exit task namespaces P. Bad fork cleanup millimeters. If P millimeters, gut P millimeters. Bad fork cleanup signal. If clone flags and clone thread, free signal struct P signal. Bad fork cleanup SIAD. Cleanup SIAD P SIAD. Bad fork cleanup FS. Exit FSP, blocking. Bad fork cleanup files. Exit files P, blocking. Bad fork cleanup SEMUDO. Exit SEM P. Bad fork cleanup audit. Audit free P. Bad fork cleanup policy. Perf event free task P. Hash if def config UMA. Mpol put P mem policy. Bad fork cleanup group. Hash endif. If clone flags and clone thread, thread group change end current. Group exit P, 0. Delay account TSK free P. Module put task thread info P exec domain module. Bad fork cleanup count. Atomic December and P cred user processes. Exit creds P. Bad fork free. Free task P. Fork out. Returner PTR retro. Static inline void idle PIDs struct PID link links. Un PID type. For type PID type PID, type PID type max, plus type. It list node and links type node, not really needed. Links type PID and struct PID. Struct task struct fork idle int CPU. Struct task struct task. Task copy process clone VM 0 null and struct PID 0. If is a task. Idle PIDs task PIDs. Idle task CPU. Return task. /. Okay, this is the main fork routine. It copies the process, and if successful kickstarts it and waits for it to finish using the VM if required. Long do fork unsigned long clone flags. Unsigned long stack start. Unsigned long stack size. Int user parent tidtor. Int user child tidtor. Struct task struct P. Int trace 0. Long near. /. Determine whether and which event to report to PineTracer. When called from kernel thread or clone untraced is explicitly requested, no event is reported, otherwise, report if the event for the type of forking is enabled. If clone flags and clone untraced. If clone flags and clone fork, trace PineTrace event fork. Else if clone flags and xigl equals sigcld, trace PineTrace event clone. Else trace PineTrace event fork. If likely, PineTrace event enabled current, trace 0. P copy process clone flags, stack start, stack size. childted to, null, trace. Do this prior waking up the new thread. The thread pointer might get invalid after that point, if the thread exits quickly. If is a P. Struct completion fork. Trace SCHED process fork current, P. Near task PIDVNRP. If clone flags and clone parent setted, put user near, parented to. If clone flags and clone fork. P fork done and fork. Id completion and fork. Get task struct P. Wake up new task P. /forking complete and child started to run, tell Pine Tracer. If unlikely trace, Pine Trace event trace, near. If clone flags and clone fork. If wait for fork done P, and fork, Pine Trace event fork done, near. Else. Near PTRP. Return near. / Create a kernel thread. PIDT kernel thread int fn void arg, unsigned long flags. Return do fork flags clone VM clone untraced, unsigned long fn, unsigned long arg, null. Hash if def arch want system fork. Syscall define 0 fork. Hash if def config mmu. Return do fork sig and 0 null. Hash else. Cannot support in mu mode. Return evil. Hash endif. Hash if def arch want system fork. Syscall define 0 fork. Return do fork clone VM sig and 0 null. Hash endif. Hash if def arch want system clone. Hash if def config clone backwards. Syscall define 5 clone, unsigned long, clone flags, unsigned long, usp. Int user, parented to. Int, tls file. Int user, childed to, hash elif defined config clone backwards to, syscall define 5 clone, unsigned long, usp. Unsigned long, clone flags. Int user, parented to. Int user, childed to. Int, tls file, hash elif defined config clone backwards 3, syscall define 6 clone, unsigned long, clone flags, unsigned long, usp. Int, stack size. Int user, parented to. Int user, childed to. Int, tls val, hash else. Syscall define 5 clone, unsigned long, clone flags, unsigned long, usp. Int user, parented to. Int user, childed to. Int, tls val, hash endif. Return do fork clone flags, usp, 0, parented to, childed to. Hash endif. Hash if def arch minimum struct align. Hash define arch minimum struct align 0. Hash endif. Static void syad ctia void data. Struct syad data. Spin lock it and syad siglock. It wait q head and syad sigalf wqh. Void it proc caches it void. Syad cache mem cache create, syad cache. Size of struct syad struct, 0. Slab cache align slab panic slab destroy by RCU. Slab attract, syad ctia. Signal cache mem cache create, signal cache. Size of struct signal struct, 0. Slab cache align slab panic slab attract, null. Files cache mem cache create, files cache. Size of struct files struct, 0. Slab cache align slab panic slab attract, null. fs cache mem cache create, fs cache. Size of struct fs struct, 0. Slab cache line slab panic slab track, null. Fix me. The size of struct millimeters struct currently includes the whole struct q mask for the off stack case. We could change this to only allocate as much of it as required by the maximum number of CPUs we can ever have. The q mask allocation is at the end of the structure, exactly for that reason. Millimeters cache mem cache create, millimeters struct. Size of struct millimeters struct, arch minimum struct align. Slab cache align slab panic slab track, null. VM area cache mem cache VM area struct, slab panic. Mapite. Sproxy cacheite. // Check constraints on flags passed to the Asheri system call. Static int check Asheri flags unsigned long Asheri flags. If Asheri flags and clone thread clone fs clone use clone syad. Clone vm clone files clone sysfsem. Clone uarts clone uip clone ua. Clone user clone upid, return evil. Not implemented, but pretend it works if there is nothing to Asheri. Note that Asherig clone thread or clone syad needs to Asheri VM. If Asheri flags and clone thread clone syad clone VM. Fix me, get task millimeters, increments millimeters users. If atomic read and current millimeters to millimeters users, 1, return evil. Return 0. / Asheri the file system structure if it is being shared. Static int Asheri fs unsigned long Asheri flags, struct fs struct new fsp. Struct fs struct fs current fs. If Asheri flags and clone fs, return 0. / don't need lock here, in the worst case we'll do useless copy. If fs users equals 1, return 0. New fsp copy fs struct fs. If new fsp, return neomen. Return 0. / Asheri file descriptor table if it is being shared. Static int Asheri fd unsigned long Asheri flags, struct files struct new fdp. Struct files struct fd current files. Int error 0. If Asheri flags and clone files, and fd and atomic read and fd count, 1. New fdp duck fd and error. If new fdp, return error. Return 0. / Asheri allows a process to Asheri part of the process. Context which was originally shared using clone. Copy. Functions used by do fork cannot be used here directly, because they modify an inactive task struct that is being constructed. Here we are modifying the current, active task struct. Syscall define one Asheri, unsigned long, Asheri flags. Struct fs, new fs null. Struct files struct fd, new fd null. Struct cred new cred null. Struct sproxy new sproxy null. Int do sysfsem 0. Enter. / If Asheri a user namespace must also Asheri the thread. If Asheri flags and clone user, Asheri flags equals clone thread clone fs. If Asheri a thread from a thread group, must also Asheri VM. If Asheri flags and clone thread, Asheri flags equals clone VM. If Asheri VM, must also Asheri signal handlers. If Asheri flags and clone VM, Asheri flags equals clone syad. If Asherig namespace, must also Asheri file system information. If Asheri flags and clone use, Asheri flags equals clone fs. Check Asheri flags If go to bad Asheri out. Clone UIP must also detach from the UDA list, after switching to a new IP namespace. The semaphore arrays from the old namespace are unreachable. If Asheri flags and clone UIP clone sysfsem, do sysfsem1. Asheri fs Asheri flags, and new fs. If go to bad Asheri out. Asheri fd Asheri flags, and new fd. If go to bad Asheri cleanup fs. Asheri uses Asheri flags, and new cred. If go to bad Asheri cleanup fd. Asheri sproxy namespaces Asheri flags, and new sproxy. New cred, new fs. If go to bad Asheri cleanup cred. If new fs new fd do sysfsem new cred new sproxy. If do sysfsem. Clone sysfsem is equivalent to system exit. Exit sem current. If new sproxy, switch task namespaces current, new sproxy. Task lock current. If new fs. Fs current fs. Spin lock and fs lock. Current fs new fs. If fs users, new fs null. Else. New fs fs. Spin unlock and fs lock. If new fd. Fd current files. Current files new fd. New fd fd. Task unlock current. If new cred. Install the new user namespace. Commit creds new cred. New cred null. Bad Asheri cleanup cred. If new cred, put cred new cred. Bad Asheri cleanup fd. If new fd, put files struct new fd. Bad Asheri cleanup fs. If new fs, free fs struct new fs. Bad Asheri out. Return / helper to Asheri the files of the current task. We don't want to expose copy files internals to the exec layer of the kernel. Int Asheri files struct displaced. Struct task current. Struct files struct copy null. Int error. Error Asheri fd clone files, and copy. If error copy. Displaced null. Return error. Displaced task files. Task lock task. Task files copy. Task unlock task. Return 0.